I'd like to call the City of Franklin meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for June the 8th, 2017 to order. Our first item is the consideration of the minutes from May the 11th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Number two will be consideration of a draft resolution 2017-47 to adopt an updated investment policy for non-pension pension assets. Is this
Good.
Christine? Thank you.
Well, we're very pleased today to have with us Deanne Woodring, and she's with the firm Government Portfolio Advisors, and they have been the city's investment advisors for what, 7 years now. And we're just very pleased to have Deanne with us today. We have I've been talking about updates to the investment policy for some time. There's, of course, periodically we do review all of our policies for changes in state and in federal rules, accounting changes, as well as some best practices. And we've been working hand in hand with Deanne over a really pretty much a low interest rate environment is what she has been with us throughout. But as we as staff consider what options would be best to evaluate for our investments in an environment that may not be as low an interest rate, and we may want to consider what types of tools are available to us. This would just seem to be a good time to get together and look at our existing policy and propose what tweaks, what changes make sense for where Franklin is now, as well as where we are in the market. But as we considered making any recommendations to our policy, we just thought this would be a good time for Deanne to update this committee on our investment program, and for you to be able to get a chance to see what type of expertise that we have the honor to work with on a daily basis and on an as-needed basis. So with that, I'll
Thank you, Christine.
give the floor to Deanne.
Well, it's nice to be here with you. As Christine mentioned, I've been your advisor since 2011, and we've been pretty low profile because interest rates have been low, and you had some real advantages with your bank deposits and your earnings there. And now interest rates are changing substantially, and we want to make sure to review everything here and look at your cash flows and make sure that all points are on any opportunity that you have at the appropriate risk profile. So I thought what I'd do is first kind of go over a bigger overview of your portfolio and the structure and some of the things that we're implementing here. And then that will tie to your policy and things that is important for the board and council to know what they should be drilling in and concerned about when you're looking at the investment portfolio. We just came back from the GFOA meeting 2 weeks ago in Denver. The policy recommendations are all in line with the GFOA best practice standards. That sample policy got updated about 3 or 4 years ago, and so we wanted to get you in line with those recommended practices. So most of the changes were kind of moving the wording around and that type of thing, and then we brought in some more drill down on the actual assets that you can buy.
And as we're getting ready to get started, that's probably a good place to emphasize that certainly the GFOA best practices, when we first are looking for safety of investments, then liquidity according to our needs, and those are the types of information that we can bring to Deanne is what types of liquidity, what are our projects, for example, or what type of cash flow needs do we see in the short term, and then finally we want to maximize earnings. So, certainly within the government context of managing our resources, this presentation as well as any recommendations are based on, first of all, making sure that we're safe, then liquid, pay our bills, and then finally that we can maximize our earnings.
So I've been your advisor since December 11. When I came out here the first time, I literally flew out the day and went home, and have been working with you ever since. And I had a great opportunity to go around town. I can see why you guys are growing. I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful city and all the infrastructure you're building, which also helps me to understand in structuring the portfolio and what we're looking at to reinforce the cash flow analysis that you're doing. So I've had a great day just seeing the city. When we are working as your advisor, we are working in a fiduciary capacity, so it's your best interest that we're looking out for. My team at GPA, 3 of us have worked together for 35 years. Our entire careers have been dedicated to the public fund industry. I think the key in how we're working with you is what's called non-discretionary. So nothing is done in your portfolio without approval from the finance team. And that's really important. A lot of managers will come in and take your money, take your policy, and say, see you later. But we're very involved in understanding the cash flows, the accounting, the GL, and helping to make sure that you guys are bringing all the tools to the table that you can. You've got a great finance team, and then adding us in, I'm able to see every part of your portfolio as well. Key things that we help with is the investment policy, your strategic development, the cash flows, and also presenting to you. So it's great to be here to review that. I think the key with the investment component also is that I have to turn my little page, these are kind of my themes this year. I speak a lot, I'm a GFOA presenter, but when you manage your money, you manage with intention. You have a reason why you're investing in the way you are. You manage with transparency. You make sure that everything that you're doing is very transparent within your organization, and it's the themes that you have. Manage with accountability, making sure you know why you're doing it and they're able to report to it. And then manage with confidence. When we have all those pillars in place, we're able to have a much more dynamic and positive structure for the portfolios at your level. As advisor, we help set the asset allocation. So when we go into the policy, we're going to talk about the different types of securities that you have, and then we're bringing in constraints on each of those securities to balance your portfolio. So we recommend you approve. Your investment policy is your policy. We've reviewed it and made some additions, and then your words are on it. It's your policy. We recommended some ideas. The implementation and the balancing of the portfolio, we make recommendations, but it's still your decisions and how you're doing it. And then all the way down to the actual security selections. When we're looking at that, we're always working together to make sure that we're optimizing what you're looking at. The investment policy, as Christine mentioned, is safety, liquidity, and then return. And so within that policy, I'm going to point out the areas of how we address safety, how we address liquidity, and then lastly, how we look at return. When we hit the crisis in 2008, it was like, well, return doesn't matter. But return does matter, because the way that we invest the portfolio can add incremental return, which is a lot of dollars to your city. So our goal is to be able to help you make those decisions and then be accountable to those decisions. If we've made 20 basis points more on the portfolio, we've added $200,000 to the balances in the funds, and that's worth a lot of money, and that's a lot of salaries. So it's really bringing those together. The updates that we're proposing are driven from the GFOA standards. The policy was outdated, so we consolidated some of the language. You'll have a maximum maturity, so these are the key points that you need to be, I gotta get ahead of myself here. You have a maximum maturity of 4 years on any single investment. That's statute. So that will be the final maximum maturity that you'll ever see in the portfolio. The weighted average maturity of the portfolio, and this is your cash and your investments, will never exceed 2 years. That's also a risk constraint for you, so we keep that maximum maturity combined in all the assets at a low level. Maturity is what drives price change in the portfolio, and even though the securities that we're purchasing are pretty much buy and hold, they also, every year you have to do a fair market value evaluation of those, so that having that 2-year constraint keeps that at an appropriate level for operating funds. Asset allocation constraints are being applied to the different issuer types to make sure that you're diversified in those names. And then where ratings apply, which is really mainly to any municipal bonds that you would buy, we're calling out specific rating agencies that you'll be using. Statute says by a nationally recognized rating agency, and we're saying you'll use S&P, Moody's, or Fitch, and calling that out. So it's just bringing clarity to the policy. The 5 areas within the policy that are important is the scope and the objectives of the investments, the standards of care, the suitable investments, the investment parameters, and reporting. So you internally have a strong reporting system in here. It's called Tracker, and you're managing that internally. I also do reporting for you, and then we match and reconcile those 2 pieces together. I feel like our job as advisors is to continue to empower your finance team with the tools to manage and monitor that. So by you having that system and me having a joint one, we're making sure that the accuracy of the numbers are there. On this next page is a compliance report. It's a little bit hard to read up on the screen, very hard to read on the screen, but each, and we'll talk about whether you see this report to you on a quarterly basis. We are producing it, but it basically takes your investment policy and shows how your investments are laid over the top of that. So when we look at, right now the portfolio has about 30% in U.S. Treasury securities. and 39% in agency securities on the investments. And then we have the issuer. This compliance policy is based off your draft policy, and I wanted to bring that forward so that you can see how the two pieces tie together. And then you have bank deposits of about 29 million. So by looking at this, you have a quick overview. Our policy states this. This is how we're invested. Are we in compliance? And yes, you are. The bottom section of it shows the two different components of the portfolio. We focus on a liquidity component, which is your money that's there to pay payroll, your day-to-day, your construction funds, and then there's an investment component. By establishing these two components, it allows us to make decisions quickly and concisely on how we want those investments to be made. So when a maturity comes up, do you need the cash for liquidity? You're set on liquidity. You don't need it. Now we go invest it. So it creates a really good communication tool for us. The liquidity fund is our work in looking at the cash flows and the needs. With the project funds you are doing, as I mentioned, there's a lot of roads going up out there and a lot of things happening. So we try to, as best we can, to figure out when those cash flow is needed. We're never exact, but I just need a general idea, and then we're able to maturity match those flows that we expect. Your liquidities are primarily held in your LGIP pool, which is your state pool, or in bank deposits. And then the investment funds are funds that we can carve out and say that are for longer-term project funds or your general operating funds. And those are still in highly liquid. Statute requires you to be in U.S. Treasuries and agency securities, so the securities themselves are very, very safe and high quality for the portfolio. We also use a benchmark to manage the portfolio, to manage the average maturity of that. Right now we're using a 1.5-year average maturity benchmark. So again, that keeps the portfolio invested, but you're not invested too long in the market and protected against market interest rate increases. On this page, this illustrates what we've come through. I should have taken us all the way back to 2011, because if you look at interest rates back to 2011, when we started, rates were at 0.2. And today we're at 1%, and I am so excited that I can say we made it to 1%. It's been a long haul, and being in the business, I've been in the business since 1982 when interest rates started at 18, 20%. And to be in this rate environment that we've been so long has been really painful. So now we're really getting some movement and really going to get some opportunities, and you will see that without taking on a lot of risk, just moving up as the Federal Reserve moves their rates, as we continue to balance out the investment component in the core, I think we'll get some really good results of increased earnings. I think most public funds have kind of just forgot about the earnings on the portfolios because they've dropped so much. But we definitely will be seeing some changes in that coming forward. The top line here is, the blue line is the 2-year Treasury note. The lower line is the 3-month bill, which is comparable to your LGIP rates. And what this tells us is that our goal with the investment portfolio is to continue to have that move up with the short-term rates, and that has to do with the maturity that we're invested in. So we should, and we already are seeing those benefits.
Do you base any of your assumptions on Fed projections as far as rate increases and what, or you just do your assumptions after they've done their end?
We apply what's happening to the market to the investment decisions that you're doing. We're not guessing. We're not projecting
Okay.
out. And you know,
Good
with
question.
public fund investing, it is what it is. And so we're very much we're responding and positioning. So with your portfolio, the way we do that is the investment component's at 1.5 years, target benchmark. So we're keeping a little shorter. So when we make investments, we're having your average maturity more like 1.2 to 1.3. If we were really trying to predict the market, we'd have you in cash and then we'd have you out long. We're not doing that. We're staying very consistent and very disciplined because we can't outguess the market. So on this next page shows you at this point we have the core investment component. There's about $66 million that's invested in Treasury and agency securities. And the balance of $31 million, this is as of March, was in cash and LGIP. So those are the components that we're constantly blending together. The investment earnings, you were earning 110, and the liquidity earnings, you were earning about 0.92. So your overall portfolio is at 104. And as I said, I'm really excited about that. And your average maturity on the total portfolio is just shy of a year. So that's what we're using is when we put the two combinations together to be right about a year is where best practices is maintained. We might move that out a little bit longer as rates go up, but we're always, our number one eye is on that liquidity. So we do a little adjustment as far as the market, but not a big swing. We're not buying and selling. we're investing, and then when maturities come due, we'll reset kind of where that average maturity is. The next page just shows you the trend line from fiscal year, and it's that yield to maturity row cost where you started out the year at 0.73 and we're up to 101. And that just has to do with making more investments. We moved from the bank deposits because all of a sudden now we could invest higher than the bank deposits and shifted those investments. We went from about 30 million to 60 million. And then you also had a bond issue in there. So we applied some of more of those to the investments. The unrealized gain is important to note. This is part of our transparency. As interest rates go up, the value of the holdings that we have go down. As interest rates go down, the value of them go up. So we're being real transparent and showing you what that mark-to-market change is. And it will go up and it will go down, and we have it measured by determining that 1.5-year maturity, that's appropriate balance for you. That is the tolerance level. A worst-case scenario would be we would have to go out and sell securities that you needed for liquidity. That's why we're monitoring both of those really closely. And usually we always have a place to go within the portfolio to sell something if it's needed. All the securities are liquid and we can go there. So that's constantly being monitored.
At this point, I guess I would make the point that we typically, as Deanna said, our goal is to buy and to hold. We, of course, are required by accounting rules to have the market price, and we at the end of the year we do have to book with the market value. However, our goal is always to restructure the portfolio, having the best information that we can about our cash needs, that we do not intend to sell before a maturity, and that's why we do layer the portfolio the way that we do, even though we certainly stay aware of what our market values are, because as rates go up, our market prices, will reflect that opposite change.
And I am watching all the time. If there is an opportunity to rebalance the portfolio and be able to take profits with that, I will watch for that too, but it's not an active portfolio, active trading. I did go back because I think one of the questions that you should be reviewing is it worth us to be doing the investments in-house? Is this the right way for us to do it? So I went back from fiscal year and looked at the state pool, because that really is your alternative, leaving in the pool and letting that manage it. And the portfolio is ahead by about $277,000 from the implementation of this core liquidity. So that's just this fiscal year. So keeping that track record over time really helps bring confidence to you that the strategies that are being implemented are bringing dollars to the city. And then the last two pages are just really, they're again small, sorry about that, but they're really the specific holdings. So we've got the treasuries on the bottom and the agency securities on the top. This is more of a disclosure to you to be able to say, yeah, they said they have agencies and treasuries. What's our position? You'll notice that we don't have a lot of positions. Our philosophy is not to own a lot of $100,000 and $200,000. We can get plenty of diversification out by having larger blocks, is what we call that, 2.5 million blocks. And it also allows us to make adjustments to the portfolio when something comes due, and we want to have an influence to that portfolio by maturity or structure. So that's the breakout of the investment portfolio, names. And then the last page is where your liquidity balances are. They're primarily in First Citizens Bank, Pinnacle, and First Third Bank, fully collateralized. So the next steps for us is we are working right now on what we call a guideline portfolio strategy. It allows us to sit down and review the cash flows and the structure of the portfolio. We work today on looking at your reporting system and making sure that they have their eyes on it the same way that I'm looking at it, at the liquidity in the core. We're going to establish a minimum liquidity balance of about $25 million. So if that balance drops, all alarms go off. We talk to each other and go, where's the cash? What's going on? But this allows us to be very disciplined on how we're structuring the portfolio. Probably look to increase the size. We haven't finalized this, but with this new bond proceed, the investments will probably go up to about $75 million. Maintain the duration at 1.5 years. I think that's a good level. As the city continues to grow and as rates come up, if they continue to come up, it might be 2 years, might be 3 years, we'd come back and say, we see the stability. You have the room to move out the curve now a little bit, but right now I think the 1.5 year with all the construction going on and everything happening is a perfect place for you. And then the policy considerations are the GFOA best practices. So that was a quick overview. But pretty concise on what's happening. So do you have the policy in front of you, the policy draft in front of you?
It has the revisions. Well, that's the short thing though, but the longer thing is
There's
on there too.
12-page policy.
Right.
Yeah.
So the key things, I think to focus on is the objectives. We mentioned the safety, the liquidity, and the return, and that's on page 3. So just a brief overview of the safety. The way that we address safety in managing money is to limit and diversify. So by putting in the allocations of how much Fannie Mae, how many farm credits you can have, and then also being accountable to interest rate risk. So that's that average maturity. So the reason we're putting the 2-year constraint is to balance the safety of the portfolio and the mark-to-market change. The liquidity is just what we already talked about, is making sure that you always have cash available to pay the bills. We never want to have to go to the portfolio and sell. We might have to, but we ideally don't want to. So creating this liquidity core makes sure that you have that cash available. Too much cash can be a cost. Leaving that money in the bank is a cost as well. So that's why we implement both these procedures. And then return. The focus is to retain a market rate of return. So we utilize a market benchmark. So 1% is where you should be earning your money. That's where the market is. If you came in and you saw 3%, you all should be alarmed, because there's nowhere in a secure market environment right now we can get 3%. So having that benchmark and having those tools in place ensures that your portfolio is doing what it should be doing. And those are the accountability measures that you want to bring in. Then the next part is on page 7, which is the allowable securities. We reviewed statute and removed money market funds from the list. Those were not in statute, and they never were in the portfolio, but removed those. And went in and defined a little bit more on your deposits. The CDARS and some of the products that are available are allowable. And then they also separated out on page 8 the bond proceeds. The only difference between your investment, your general funds, and bond proceeds is bond proceeds can own municipal bonds throughout the country, so that is allowable under that. I'm not sure that we'll really use that for your bond proceeds, but it is allowable, so we're putting that in policy. Within your general funds, you can own your own debt, but you can't own other municipalities. So that was the only main significant changes that we looked at. Then the next page, on page 9, is the parameters and the ratings. So the main exposure that you have in rating securities would be in bankers' acceptance and commercial paper. The statute allows for A1, P1, F1. A1 plus P1 is the highest rating. I don't really see us doing a lot of commercial paper. If we do, it'll be in a slightly higher credit rating of A1 plus, but that's what the statute allows within there. And then it has to be under 90 days on the commercial paper. Commercial paper is unsecured corporate debt. So it's, but it does have ratings and it has longer term ratings. So we'll stay with high quality securities in that. And then the diversification here, make sure, so 35% in agency names, so you won't see any more than 35% in a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac or a Farm Credit. So that's the keys to the safety and its issuer protection. Then on page 10 is the maturity buckets. So you always have 10% of the portfolio under 30 days, 50% of the portfolio will be invested under 2 years, and 100% will be under 4 years. Your maximum maturity of 2 years on the total portfolio. And then we're putting a constraint on callable securities. Callables is a structure that moves your portfolio without us doing anything to it, so we're suggesting to have a constraint on that. And then lastly is just accountability and reporting. I'll be tracking your performance reporting to the benchmark, which is required in here. And then you receive a monthly report and quarterly report, and we can work on designing a quarterly report for this committee. I think that might be good with the compliance report with those consistent strategies in there. It can be that one-pager compliance report for due diligence. But that was it for the changes. There isn't a red line, because the red line would have been so confusing to go through because there were so many structural changes on it that we're submitting it just basically with a rewrite on it.
And since it's been several years since it's been considered, it seemed like it would be a good time to just look at it clean.
Anyone have any comments or questions?
This is probably an elementary question for somebody that thinks, but when you go to the maturity constraints, 100%, but out of the 100%, which is everything's under 4 years, out of the 100%, 50% of that is under 2 years. and 10% on the 30 days, right?
Right.
Okay.
But all of it has to be under, it's
But
kind of
everything has to be under
under 4 years. Right. And combined, the combined weighted can't be over 2 years. So when we put them all together, you can't be over 2 years.
Okay.
Anything else?
One thing I just wanted
Sounds
to have you
good to me.
touch on. In our objectives, we talk about, of course, safety, liquidity, return. There's also that last element talks about local considerations. How does that play out, or has that played out in the work you've done with us?
No, that was in your policy, and we had talked about that, and we didn't want to take it out because it was in there, but that might be a good discussion point.
Okay.
It's been in there as a
It's
legacy.
just it's a kind of a legacy piece, because
Mhm.
quite frankly, I've been here 8.5 years, we've never talked about local considerations in this
Yeah.
realm, so I don't know. if
I
it's-
haven't looked at that, other than the banks.
Yeah. Russ, any history
Russ.
on that? I just,
Russ talked about before you got here.
okay. Local considerations, like what's the best way to get from point A to point B?
You have to tell if I'm telling this correctly, because I've never appeared before you without a tie.
This is Citizen Russ Trull.
That's a local consideration.
You know, we put that in the policy that goes back to 2004 or 5, because we wanted to be able to use local banks. And in the past, if you go back a long way, long before the Great Recession, the local banks at certain times of the year would be hungry for cash. You know, at the end of the year, they'd want to pad their balance sheet and so on. And we could always get a little bit extra on CD rates than we could by going out to the Treasury market. And Deanne, you and I have talked about this a number of times. We did not go through GPA as far as talking about this, but we would go out at least once a month and test the market and find out what banks were offering. And if those rates looked better and they stayed within the 4-year maturity than what we could get on treasuries or agencies of any kind, home loan bank, et cetera, we would try to use that. But we would also use that diversification piece that was discussed, that we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket. Even if you spread the money among local banks, you still don't want to put all your money in local banks. When I first arrived here, all the money that was invested on behalf of the city of Franklin that was not in the LGIP were in 90-day CDs
At local banks.
in local banks.
Interesting.
Now, if you saw the picture of what the 90-day rate is versus the 2-year rate, you can imagine how much money was being left on the table. And remember, when we did CDs, they're federally insured, so they're, you know, and if the banks didn't have enough, if we went over the limit, which I think it was
It used
$100,000
to be
at that
100.
time, they had to belong to the collateral pool or pledge collateral, and Mike, you were here. There was a lot of, you know, every time the bank wanted to change the collateral that they had, it was an exercise of having to go through and approve it, and sometimes bringing it to the committee or the board. So it was frankly a nuisance to do that. But, you know, where it is possible, I would still urge you to consider doing money with the local banks. First, because it makes you look good to have the money here and theoretically invested in the community. But also it adds a lot of diversification to your portfolio. And in the long run, that may be the greatest relief from risk that you can have, because you don't know what's going to happen to Fannie Mae. They're talking about changing some of the rules now. You really don't know what might happen with that. That's why you put limits on how much of one particular vendor that you would buy from. But if you have 40 banks in Williamson County and you have money in 10 of them, they're not all going to fail. So it's very comforting to know that you do have that money there, and it is federally insured. So, you know, I think you don't want to go overboard on that local preference. You don't want to look at it as a local preference. It's more of a local option. And that's the way I think that your finance team has always looked at it. It's the option that you have that happens to be local. It's something that you can go to. If you did have a flood and you needed to raise money, it's something where you can go to the bank and pledge that CD to borrow money against. So it does give you a little extra layer of comfort.
But it's still fitting within three pillars that we talk about.
The three
ahead of time.
pillars are,
They
you
still
know,
stand. I mean, that's, yeah.
This
You
is
know,
a
those are
consideration,
clearly-
it's not a require, this is
Mhm.
not a top
We're not, we're not
consider.
trading off the other pieces for this.
You're
This
really
just
not.
is
You're
a-
looking at all of those at the same
Mhm.
time when you do that. And Deanne's heard me say it before, you know, it used to always be safety, liquidity, and then yield. You know, after 2008, I gotta tell you, I think it's liquidity, safety, and then yield. Because it didn't matter how safe anything was in 2008, you couldn't sell anything.
Mhm.
So liquidity is a very big piece of this now, almost equivalent with safety.
And the way this is worded too, so it's to support the community. So it's
Mhm.
saying that in going to the banks, there's a tie to, that you're keeping it in the
Other
community.
benefit.
Yeah, you
Mhm.
don't want banks to be taking it and then going around and investing it and getting that spread on it.
Mhm.
If they're putting it back into your community, that's kind of a trend that we're seeing
Mhm.
nationally as well.
Mhm.
How do we know that? How do we know that they're putting it back into the community? And I don't wanna, well, I'll pick on the next door neighbor over here, First Tennessee, whose corporate headquarters, I assume, is in Memphis or someplace, and they've got spread out all over. Do you consider that a local bank?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they clearly have a
That's a
very
good
large
answer.
presence
You should,
in middle.
you should have been testifying before the Senate
Today.
today.
Please don't confuse me with those guys. If you notice the names in here, you didn't see Bank of America.
Right.
You didn't see SunTrust. You didn't see Wells Fargo. You didn't see any of them. I mean, we're looking at, I don't even remember the
Pinnacle,
names,
Fifth Third.
Reliant and
Yeah.
Synergy
Fifth
and,
Third, yeah.
Yeah, third.
I mean,
First Tennessee.
First-
first of all, it's almost impossible to get realistic bids when we ask for money rate bids from those banks. We do get bids from First Tennessee, but they haven't been competitive in the last little while. But some of the smaller banks have a greater need for money, and they're willing to pay a little more for that. So we have reason to believe that they keep their money closer to home
Okay.
than any of the large, you know, one of the rips on Bank of America and Citibank and those people were, you know, when rates were high, I mean, they were getting money from local communities and loaning it in Europe. We didn't want to be part of that, so.
But I will point out, First Tennessee, when we did back in February, we bid out the water and sewer bonds, competitive sale.
Mhm.
First Tennessee bought those bonds with the
Yes.
lowest interest rate.
Yes.
And First Tennessee in the last few years, throughout the state of Tennessee, has really stepped up on buying bonds
Yeah.
in competitive sales,
Okay.
where they, for a number of years, they just didn't have the resources to do
Right.
that. So there are certain regional banks that really have shown
Yeah,
more
that-
interest in Tennessee and outside of,
First
just urban
Tennessee has a big
issues.
reach, but they have a very strong local presence within the state. And I would argue even within the Middle Tennessee, greater Nashville region, yes.
Well, I was just thinking about years ago, when Weems County Bank was on the corner and Harper National was up on the other corner and somebody else was on the other corner. Those were local banks.
Right.
And I just don't, well, Reliance or some of the others may be, but I just don't see that when I look at Fifth Third and First Tennessee and whatever.
Their world's changed. Even the ones who,
Oh.
that are based in this area, their world is so
Of course,
regulated.
First Tennessee's getting much bigger and taller.
Or at least a piece of.
The real estate is, yeah.
Mhm. That's right. They're fellow tenants.
That's right.
Any others?
My thank you.
Since I'm sitting up here, can I add that, just for historical sake, when we went through the process, we never had an outside advisor before 2011. And it was one of the things that I picked up in one of the GFO, the Government Finance Officers Committees, that, you know, if you really want to have your money, if you still want to control the investment but have the money professionally managed, that having an advisor like this would be a good idea. We put out an RFP, I think we had 8 or 9 responses, all of them from very good firms. We selected 3 finalists, and Deanne's organization was the one that came out on top. All of the organizations that were finalists are extremely professional, well-funded, well-organized outfits. And we really have, even though we make the final decisions, we're getting professional advice and professional management at a fraction of what it would cost if we went out and did, you know, a big bank, you know, wealth management type of program. So we pay Deanne's organization based on a fee that's a few basis points of what the investments are. And for that, we get, in addition to the advice, she does the execution for us. So she actually goes out when we decide to buy something and actually takes bids. And she finds the broker that will sell it to us for the cheapest price. And we feel like we make up her fee and perhaps then some through better execution than if we were out there trying to buy this ourselves. So this has been a very good program. It's been unfortunate that we've had low interest rates and really haven't been able to take advantage of the expertise that we have. But going forward, I think this is a big, important thing. And I can't tell you how much pressure it takes off of the finance team to know that you have somebody in a fiduciary capability, a fiduciary status, looking out for our interest.
Where that is your job, and that does
And it's
help.
the team, I mean, it really is a team with us too. It's really understanding and you know, being out here and seeing everything that's going on and having us communicate the same way just lets us leverage more. So I'm really excited about going forward and what we're gonna build. So,
Very good, very good.
thank you.
Thank you.
So now we would need to get a motion to move this to the
Yes.
forward.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Right, move on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 3 is consideration of ordinance 1730, an ordinance to adopt updates to the Franklin Municipal Code, Title 18, Water and Sewer Billing Procedures.
As Lawrence is taking the seat, I'll just take a moment to introduce the next couple of items. When I joined our team back in January, and we talked about, of course, the budget process had already started, and I jumped in with our folks. We talked about that June would be a good time to look at our policies after the finance committee has to wade through budget for 3 months, and we get through May. Let's take notes as we go through, and look at June as a good time to come to you for some policy updates. One of the processes that's been ongoing, of course, during the budget season, and Lawrence has taken one of our lead roles in this process, is a utility billing conversion process that will be going. We already are running dual systems, but is getting ready to be executed officially start of fiscal year 18. As we go into the new utility billing software. And so a couple of the updates that we're going to be talking about, we really have been looking very closely at how we do business as we implement this new system, especially as we got ready to run 2 systems at one time. That was where we very critically looked at everything that we do. And I'll let Lawrence explain what some of these cleanup items are. But we certainly want to make sure that we have policies that accurately reflect the way we do business. And these may have been some changes that folks maybe thought have already been instituted, and they hopefully will make sense. But we do want to make sure that this is a good opportunity to have all of our policies and practices line up. My introduction hopefully was accurate there. I think it's accurate, but hopefully it's understandable.
Very accurate. And if we could look realistically at 30, item number 30 and 31, they fall in the exact same pattern. If you go back in time, Russ, the historian, has left, but at one point years ago, we did water and sewer. It was ours within the city. We wrote our ordinances accordingly. An example here is that the bills that we send out will constitute or add other services. Under the water part, it says we can add other services. And it said those bills will be paid on or before a due date to get a discount. That's up in the water part. When we only had water and sewer, that was okay. When we added sewer, we didn't necessarily repeat that phrase, but it's in the same code section. Other bills that we could add when we added stormwater, we didn't necessarily repeat that, but it's in this section. and/or with garbage or solid waste, it'll come later. So the primary premise here is that we now have about 7,000 customers that may open the city code and say, I want to read about sewer because they're in the Mill Crofton or the
That's their
HB&TS
Their
district.
only
That's their only
one piece
connection
of
with
it.
us.
Yeah.
Correct. So really, the only thing we're doing here is to clarify that there is a discount if you pay in 15 days. The alternative is, and the word is in here, penalty, so it's the carrot or the stick, if you're after the 15 days. But that's moving that little paragraph from the beginning of all of the section to bring it sewer to say, if you're only reading that section, you'll see that same term. That's in 18, Title 18. If you go to Title 23, that's where that newer animal of stormwater shows up, and we have 150 customers that only pay us trash and stormwater. They're out in the Wilson Pike area. So there's a few
That's
people that may look up and see that they're not looking for anything for sewer or water. They're just looking for trash and stormwater. They're in the city,
I'd
but
be
we don't have
surprised
sewer
about-
for them.
Well, okay, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, I'd be
Septic
surprised about
Yes, they're still in
stormwater.
septic, yeah. Well, they do pay
Everybody has
that,
to do
so.
stormwater.
So
Yeah.
that may grow, probably not, but for that 150 folks, we're putting it in that section as well. So that's the request, is to update that at this time. The fun process of, it's been long, but of putting the two systems, we told the software developers, here's what we do, and they came back and said, here's how it comes out. And we said, well, it's not exactly what we thought it would look, and making it look like it's allowed us to make sure we have everything the same. It's been a very, very beneficial process for us to get through that. And these are two items that just clarify.
And this really shows reality
Yes, ma'am.
now.
Yes,
in-
ma'am.
In having all the different circumstances where we collect the money.
Yes, ma'am. And that's all I have. Do you have any other questions?
So really, I think we would look at these two together. Is that all right, or?
That's fine. We'll
What about
ultimately
some
have the
comments or
board vote
questions?
on them as separate
That's-
items.
that's
but
right.
If you want it as a group motion, I think that's fine.
What about some other comments, though, before we?
So on these, they only get our solid waste and stormwater if they fail to pay their bills. What are the repercussions, you know?
Well,
Are
there.
we on TV?
We are.
Oh, that's right, because you can cut.
We have used collection services in the
We have.
past.
We have.
Okay.
It's, and we can reach them. When we knock on the door and ask to speak to them, they're very accommodating.
Okay.
It's, and those aren't the highest of receivables. They're pretty small.
Yeah, if they're
I-
just so few.
Yeah. But it is not the same when we can't cut the water off. That's
Uh-huh,
correct.
really,
Mhm.
you're right. Yeah,
You
indeed.
don't have to pick up the trash, Andy.
What I was
That's
going to
right.
say was they won't let me take it back to them.
But that's interesting on just getting the sewer or wastewater. You still cut off their water?
And we have an agreement. We have
Okay, you have an agreement
reciprocal
with the,
agreements with two of
other
the
u-
three, with two of our three
Okay.
largest partners. The
Okay.
three large relationships that we have,
Right.
two of the
Mhm.
three allow that. One is yet to, but we manage that by communication with them.
Mhm.
Most of it's through the mail, but every once in a while, we might leave something on their window or knock on their door.
Mhm.
But it's
Mhm.
very, very congenial,
Yes.
and it
yes.
works.
You make a good point. It does make it makes it more challenging when you don't have the water.
To cut, I mean,
to-
I'm sorry, that's the,
Mhm, That's
And
the
you don't
stick.
dig up a sewer line, do you?
No, sir.
I'd make a motion to approve ordinance 2017-30 as well as 2017-31.
Second.
any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, that will also be moved
Thank you.
on. We'll move on to the board. Okay, item 5, draft resolution 2017-41, a resolution adopting a revised purchasing policy for City of Franklin procurements not pertaining to new construction. And should we put those two together too? I don't know.
Yes,
Okay.
that would.
Let's go ahead then.
5 and 6 together.
Yeah, 5 and 6 together also.
And as a point of introduction, these Brian's going to introduce what these primarily cleanup items are, but
Yeah.
we just they do relate to one another. This would be a good time to look at these two policies at the same time.
Good afternoon, committee. Staff recommends the purchasing policy for city procurements not pertaining to new construction be revised in the following ways. First, to reference federal regulation pertaining to procurement of property and/or services under a federal award. Second, to indicate how requests to inspect and/or obtain either complete or partial copies of purchasing-related records are to be handled. And thirdly, otherwise update the policy. A red line version of the policy is attached to your meeting materials. Also attached is the resolution as proposed, including a clean version of the revised policy. Staff recommends that the committee recommend to the board that the board approve resolutions 2017-41 and 42. I'll get to 42 in just a second, adopting these two policies. I might note that the agenda caption has the word draft in it, and that's because the Law Department routine review of these
Okay,
documents
thank
is
you.
forthcoming.
Thank you.
And so if the Law Department review results in substantive changes from what I've presented to you today, I'll return to another committee meeting and we'll revisit the matter again before we schedule the topic for a meeting of the full board. The other resolution then, I think you're right to put these two together. That's 2017-42, has to do with the protest procedure. And none of the changes that we're recommending are substantive. They're all capitalizing
Right,
terms
exactly.
and that sort of thing, just to make it a little easier to use when the need arises. I might ask all of us to knock on wood that the need doesn't arise
true,
very often. And we're grateful for that and appreciate the board's support for having this protest procedure so that we have a plan for when that need does arise. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Motion to approve Resolution 2017-41 and 2017-42.
To recommend to the board. Second.
Well, recommend to the
Sure,
board,
sure.
but approve out of committee.
That's right, approved by the committee. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Very good.
Thank you, Brian.
So item 7 is the presentation of the actuarial valuation report. And we do have that now.
We do have a draft report, and what I did want to present to you was an update from Monday of this week, June the 5th. The pension committee met to hear the report of the draft audit from Acuff and Associates. And what was included in the system, I put together, we have a draft report, which there'll be some, we actually call it just a couple of very small title changes, things such as, I believe the numbers are still going through the final
Okay.
review from Acuff and Associates, but we feel good in discussing them, and certainly they were presented as substantially complete. But I did put into the system a summary of this draft report, and if anyone would like to just kind of pass, just to look at, I wanted to just highlight just a couple of items from that draft report that was presented to the committee on Monday for your reference. And some of the highlights that the actuary presented to us on Monday afternoon, first of all, is we looked at the number of participants in the plan. And the actuary did a nice job of explaining that this, of course, as the plan was closed to new hires
Right,
after
right.
December 31st of 2016, that this plan is at he called it the high water mark of number of participants.
Yeah.
So as you can see through the different categories, active participants a year ago was 564. 2017 is down to 556. We have total participants of all the categories. In 2016, it was 894, and that we're now at 908. But over time, there'll be no more new new enrollees in the plan. All of the new hires since January will become participants in the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. Certainly, there'll be active participants who will leave service after they are vested, but they're not actually retirees. There'll be shifts, but certainly as far as number of participants, the 908 will be the high water mark, the highest number of participants in this plan. The unfunded actuarial accrued liability, which is that calculation that we are really asking for the actuaries to perform to consider our current assets in the plan versus the future benefits that we have accrued. It increased from $21.5 million to $24.6 million. That it is a function of how our plan performed against assumptions. And there's many different assumptions. We talked about that on Monday afternoon. There's the rate of return assumption, which we actually, I'll just in a moment show, we were very close to meeting that rate of return. There's also tables, mortality tables based on, of course, unfortunately, how long folks in the plan will live and draw benefits. There's also assumptions on how long people will stay employed in the plan, what their salaries will be. There's assumptions on increases in salaries. There's a number of key, those are the primary key assumptions in the actuarial report, but we do have an increase, and I want to put that in the context. We have an increase in the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, but this is still a very well-funded plan. And so we do believe, and especially because we keep on meeting that funding requirement that the actuaries recommend every year. That's why this plan stays so highly funded. One consideration, of course, everyone looks at this report to say, what should we put into pension for the next budget year? In 2016, the percentage of payroll was 12.79%. As a percentage of payroll, the new actuarial report is at a little over 13%. We certainly went into the budget estimating a little higher, closer to the 15%, but we had to do an estimate, go into budget, and we're within that amount that we had put into the budget as an estimate. Did want to also highlight the funding ratio for the plan. Certainly, this is a well-funded plan. The funding ratio for 2016 was just under 96%. It has gone down to approximately 93%. As you can just see, as unfunded liability went up a little bit, the funding ratio goes down, the way the teeter-totter works. But certainly, this is a plan that we currently have accumulated plan benefits that are up to $100 million. So this, as you can see, we are earning, and we had investment earnings as well as we have employee contributions, and we made our required employer contribution for the previous fiscal year. The rate of return for 2017 certainly improved. We're glad to see that. Our assumption for the actuarial of the plan is 7.5. The rate of investment return net of the expenses is 7.3%. The gross investment return was right at 7.5 actually, and about 20 basis points were the expenses on the plan. So certainly the market was more in our favor for 17. I did include the history on 16 to show the volatility that the plan has weathered. Of course, we've updated, our pension committee has been working with us as we've transferred assets over to the administration of TCRS for this closed plan. So as of this time, there's pretty much all of the investments with about $7 to $8 million are still legacy investments that will take a little bit longer to liquidate, but around $90 million over $90 million now are being managed by TCRS of this closed plan. These are the highlights, at least as I pulled out the highlights of the draft report that we went over with the actuaries. I've got some of my colleagues who were with me here on Monday as we heard the full report. if there's any other aspects of the plan that, or the report that you would like to highlight. But I believe these are the main points to see the performance. And of course, going forward, while TCRS will be managing the assets, we will still be required to have a annual actuarial report done, similar to how ACUF has done this in the past. For the new plan that TCRS is administering as a political subdivision of TCRS, they will be administering having the actuarial report completed, and they'll be sending us those results. So we'll once we get a full year into that plan and we start getting actuarial results, we'll be presenting both summaries of the TCRS plan as well as the plan under the City of Franklin pension plan.
I think one of the things that Christine did not cover is that when, based upon the move, we also were able to cut expenses also.
Yes,
So
good point.
I would mention that.
Yes, that is a very good point, Clyde, that this report was prepared under primarily the management and the fees under the previous administration of the pension assets. And we expect the fees going under TCRS are down to the 6-7 basis point range, compared to inclusive fees were about 20%, the way it was calculated for the previous year.
Okay.
So you had all the management
Important.
agencies
Important.
themselves
Yeah.
charging a fee. Then you had the consultants that were working with us charging a fee based upon basis points on the amount that they were managing. I think there's a contract probably even coming up, workshop, board level vote, for Bryant.
Yes, and we're gonna be reducing those fees as
Yes,
well.
yeah,
There's a-
that'll be
that
30,000,
proposal.
I think.
That proposal's to
For
reduce
just
those fees.
Flat fee for the management from our financial advisor.
And that's down, I believe, about $25,000.
$25,000 from what we've
Mhm.
been.
See,
Yeah.
good point. to
Very
bring
good
that up.
point.
Yeah.
Very good.
Also, one other thing too that the committee is looking at, and I think this will probably happen, I think that we will incrementally reduce the rate of return expectancy. Probably, I know Russ has talked about 0.1% per year, but it makes a tremendous amount of difference on the budget when we reduce the expectations of what we expect the returns to be. So we're not going to we won't go the full 0.5% all at once,
Right,
but
right.
we are looking at over a 5-year period. I see Michael shaking his head back there.
No, he said no.
That's something that the pension board, I believe, has discussed for some
Yeah.
time, especially as different state pension plans have looked at those. And there have been some revisions. The state plan, TCRS, is still at 7.5%. That doesn't mean that the state pension board may not make some changes over time, but we certainly cannot have a number that's higher than the state pension board. So if we do make a move to slightly ratchet that down, that would get us in a chance to get ready in case they make a move that's even faster than what we would feel comfortable to make. But that isn't a good segue into one change that for the actuarial assumptions that we discussed with the pension board on Monday afternoon, related to the assumption on increases in salaries. That the practice for the last few years, and of course, Russ gave us a good history of how the number came to the 3.5% that's currently in the actuarial report. It's of course before the recession. I believe many places, including even the Franklin plan, had a higher salary increase assumption. Most governments went through a 3 to 5 year period in which salaries stayed pretty much stagnant
Right.
or very, very low increases. And so the 3.5% when it was instituted a few years back was very much reflective of those times of coming out of the recession. We're now seeing market pressures on salaries that are pushing the 3.5%. And in fact, the 18 budget as proposed is a 4.1% increase in salaries. So what we had asked ACUF to do was prepare an analysis of if we increase to 4% using in the current draft report, and that's actually the back page of the draft report in the system, was that analysis between the 3.5% and 4%. And we did, and Eric made a recommendation to go ahead, and that does fit within our existing budget, but I'll let Eric speak to his thoughts on that.
Well, that does encapsulate what we're doing in terms of pay increase in the budget that's there now. We built the budget with enough capacity in terms of the pension contribution that it supports that. And I think just as we move forward and we look at the competitiveness of the labor market, and both in terms of what we'll need to pay when we bring in new folks, or for the retention of the folks we have, I think that's a more accurate reflection. It's the kind of thing we look at on an ongoing basis. That number was higher at one point, we brought it down. Now it's creeping back up, and I just, it's a judgment call, but I think one that I think is supported in what we've seen in market data and what we've been able to do within the last two budgets in terms of the level pay increase and where we look at in terms of our total employment base. So I think that's wise. The budget's built to handle it, and I would suggest we use that as our working assumption at this point.
So a 4% instead of 3.5. The bottom line is, what was it, $1.3 million difference?
For the,
For
well,
the
that's the total amount in the budget for the increases. That's what we're carrying in the budget roughly for increases.
So does that reflect, so that is based upon the 4% that you're recommending?
It's like, well, I'm not sure the million.
Well, I think when we're talking about what we assumed for the budget, we actually went into the budget process with about a 15% contribution as a percentage
Yeah.
of payroll, and increasing from 3.5% to 4% on our assumptions, which increases our contribution percentage, keeps us within that 15%. In fact, we'll still have a little bit of savings after we
There's a
increase
little
that
play there
assumption.
to the good, yeah.
But that makes us more comfortable that going into the next year's actuarial report, that we've not got behind in funding simply because we had assumed 3.5% in our study, and we actually gave 4%.
A little more than
So
four,
more-
yeah.
A little more than 4.
Mhm.
Now, on this, do we just accept this, or do we pass it to the board to accept?
I think you just accept it. I don't know that the board needs to act on this. I think this is
That-
informational.
That was pretty much the way,
Yeah.
was that it was it was informational, but we
And
wanted to.
on the assumption piece, that's really pretty much integrated into what is in the proposed budget already in terms of the funding capacity. So I think it's really just kind of adjusting our assumptions, and that will be our starting point as we look at budgeting next year and pension assumptions going forward.
So one last comment, or for me on this. The 908's the highest number it'll ever be, the number of
Yep.
participants.
Yes.
This,
There'll be no, we'll
it
have,
is a closed plan, so.
it's closed, and there'll be movement between actives becoming either terminated, vested as people quit, or they'll retire.
Mhm.
And hopefully that,
Mhm.
you know, certainly the plan, yes, this is the high water mark of the number of participants.
Okay, well, so, any action, are we saying no action then at all, or?
I believe this is a report.
Yeah, it's just a
But
report
we-
to you
okay,
as a
wanted
committee.
you to feel
Mhm.
comfortable with,
Okay,
knowing knowing the high points of the report.
right. Okay, so we'll move on to item 8, the financial report for the third quarter fiscal year 2017.
Good afternoon. I'm
Mhm.
actually beginning to get used to going last.
You have a niche.
That's it. As I get started, I'm going to look at the executive summary of the report. I want to borrow a phrase that Christine just used about high watermark, because I don't ever, in my remembrance, of ever having a surplus at the end of the third quarter at 6.6 million.
Yeah.
And I know for the budget, we actually projected potentially a $2 million surplus. So how do you marry 6.6 to that 2 million? And the reason is the budget amendment that you're now considering, what we're trying to do is just account for worst case scenario. And there are some transfers, as well as there's, just in case there's some additional expenses that potentially would take that amount down closer to that 2 million. So that's where we're getting that, is that budget amendment that is still in process of being approved. And as far as where the 6.6 million is coming, that again, it goes back to the property tax rate that we have here in 2017. So it's just a higher number than we've maybe seen. But some of the transfers that are in those budget amendments are transfers to other funds for a property tax allocation. So in essence, some of this that's in the general fund will actually be transferred to some of those other funds that receive property tax revenue. So I knew that was kind of the highlight of the report. I would also just like to talk about the local sales tax. It's right around 5%, which is where we projected. Building permit, oh, yes.
No, I was just gonna say, on the property tax, did we just underestimate it? I mean, I know what you're saying here, but
Yeah.
still, was it just underestimated or just unknown?
It was just the way it was allocated because we didn't necessarily know what the total amount was going to be. So with the way the ordinance was written, we allocated in that portion. Now that we know what the actual is, that in essence is what's in the amendment now.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, on recent development activity, building permit revenue is up 16%. As you remember, there was a change in the way we calculate building permit revenue. If you look at road impact and facilities tax, it's kind of
They're not.
consistent. They both are less than last year, but last year was the record amount that we had seen. So that was kind of just comparing to that high water mark. And water sewer development fees are about the same place. And the last thing is in the capital projects fund, part of what the amendment is to move some monies to help reduce the deficit in the capital projects fund. So those are kind of the high points out of the third quarter report. And if you had any additional questions, we'd be glad to answer.
I just had some questions like, in lieu of Parkland, we've got $4.5 million plus. How is, I mean, I know we're talking about
Something
parks
can
and
be-
everything, but still, I mean, this is just, this is not about the report, but
Right.
about what does this mean to us, you know?
Mhm.
I guess that was.
Well, you know, we've got some specific projects that we'll be able to draw on those funds. We've got one before you right now in terms of the acquisition of the 77 acres along
Lockwood.
South Carruthers, just north of the 188 acres that we own already, that will be part of that Southeast Park. So that's one component. We do have that part of our financing plan for some of the other development of that park in particular. And there's some other opportunities out there that we'll be looking at. So it is the first time we're using those dollars. We've collected some over time, and
right.
now we actually have some projects and that we're allocating those to. So
But that also has to be based on the quadrant in which it was collected.
yeah, you've got the quadrants, but you've also got, and we've looked at that component, and you've also got an element of it that is the community facilities piece too. So the Southeast Park is actually a great example of that because it has elements of both in it because of the scale of it, and some citywide activities on the programmed recreational, the youth sports league side are going to be in there, but there's also elements that are much more designed to serve that region or that area of the city as well. So we'll really have components that touch on both of the pieces that you allocate parkland money for.
Well, that might be good in some other times to talk about that, because that also has to be spent in a certain number of
Yeah,
years.
we've got a timeline.
And we need to
Yes.
look at how that's
progresses,
working.
yeah.
And that ordinance we'll look to bring to you for update and finalization on some components of it in the next month or two. So you'll be seeing that issue come back around on the policy side, but we'll also be looking at it from the capital project side and the spend down requirements that are part of that.
Good.
And also, when will we know the, well, wait, two questions. What about the money that we have put into the improve, the extra money that we have said that would go to fund our special projects? That would be good to kind of just get a little report, you know,
Okay.
every so
Yeah.
often on that. Okay, and the other big thing is, talk about improve.
Yeah.
You know, do we have any idea what the effect of the Tennessee, you know, Improve Act will do for
In
us?
terms of local
Yeah,
tax
that's
as
right.
well as additional revenue.
Yeah,
There's a wait and see.
Okay, that's what I
On
thought.
some of it, because there's a little bit of, the state giveth and the state taketh away.
Yes,
It
yeah.
depends on which elements. We do expect to see additional funding in the local share of gas tax, because we get, the pie got bigger, so the local share gets a little bigger. But of course, there's a sales tax offset that was done as part of that deal, and that will reduce a portion of the state shared income pie. So that's all going to be part of that. Of course, there are direct projects that we're already seeing in terms of Mac Hatcher in year one and the 96 East widening that are both in year one, that will be direct project benefits. But ongoing funding, we'll see some increase in the local share of gas tax. The state share will be very much a mixed bag, because we'll see that
Right.
adjustment in the formula, but we also have an increased population.
Oh,
So
that's true. Okay,
we
okay.
we really don't know, and we've seen speculation from TML and I think MTS ran some numbers, but everybody tells you they don't really know. I
Okay,
mean, they sort
okay.
of have made some assumptions, but we'll have to see what really comes our way, and you know, I think we've got a little bit of cushion in the budget to help us with that. We were conservative in our assumptions, but we'll have to see and update you as we get real numbers in the new fiscal year.
And I think it would be helpful for us to see updates on how the Invest Franklin
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
has.
Well, that's really what I was talking about when I said improve. I
Right.
really meant the first, the local improve, I meant
Right.
invest, Franklin.
Yes.
For citizens to see that
Mhm.
we have done what we said we would do with those components.
And that's one of the pieces we'll be bringing to you here. We're talking about just yesterday about how to bring you some updates both on the project side and the financing
good.
capacity side.
Very
And
good.
we know there are some other projects that are sort of in process but haven't necessarily been fully approved. So how do those fit into what you may be able to do in a second tier of projects down the line? And we will update the plan too. That'll happen in the fall. We'll update the plan because there are different things with either existing projects that we had put forward or new things to consider. So we do want to refresh that 10-year plan every year to a certain extent too. So you'll see a continuation of different elements of that as we move forward. And the bond sale that we're getting ready to do later this month, or a week from today, right, that will be to the
okay.
market,
Oh,
will
good news about that.
will
We
help
should have
fund.
announced that
Yes,
too.
yeah, we'll hit
Please.
that too. We'll hit the next 2 years of funding needs for that first tier of Invest Franklin projects that are a portion of that funding in that bond sale as well.
And we do need to say, for our bond sale, we got,
Yes, let
Good
me just,
rating.
let me touch on that.
Say
We
that.
did just yesterday and earlier this week get our bond rating back from both Standard & Poor's and Moody's in anticipation of this bond sale, and both have reaffirmed our AAA bond rating, which is exciting news.
very good.
And of course, that is always, what they look at is a wide cross-section of data and information about who you are as a community. They look at our local economy, they look at our policies and our performance. They look at our long-term management of how we run our operation and manage the finances of our community. So all of that gets rolled into an assessment, and of course, AAA is the top rating that you can receive, and to get that from both rating agencies is a strong complement of
Good.
what we're doing and how we're managing. And make sure we get the lowest interest rate in the
That's
market
right.
will offer.
That's
So
exactly.
that's the
exactly.
bottom
more
line.
That's right. That's the bottom line. Okay, are we ready to go on to the monthly reports for June, or is there anything else? that
Anything
we
else
need
you
to
wanna
discuss?
touch on?
Is there any?
What it is, whereas the quarterly report has a March month end, what we try to do
Right.
with monthly reports is to provide you even more current information. So I think with local sales tax and road impact fees and facilities tax, it's consistent with the quarterly report. The one number I would like to highlight is that in the month of April, the conference center had a $36,000 profit.
Mhm.
I went ahead and looked back just to see what the year-to-date number was, and year-to-date, there's been a $78,000 profit. So I thought that would be information that would be helpful for the committee.
Good.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Anybody? Now, you know, we were just saying that we had changed the way we figured the building permits, because when I look back at that, on the building permits, it's still below 2008. I mean, just based on the numbers that I saw there.
In fees or number of permits?
You know, I think it was fees, but
Fees.
where did I see that?
I'm not sure that's.
Building permits. Yep, that's the page 3 out of 7 on those last ones. 2008 is still higher than what we had for this past year. I mean, I just a comment, because that was the high water mark, you know, back in the day. And it did plummet after that.
Look at that.
You're right.
I know. But we've been building back up, and we're getting close to it now. Okay. Oh, there was one other little thing that I had about the county. You know, the county facilities tax, it may not be in this part right here, but on the county facilities tax where we, you know,
The
the
portion
county,
we
that we're
get.
getting a portion, an extra portion of county facilities. And we have kind of, even though we did not agree that we would give it back to the county for education, we basically spent it all to improve things that went to county education, like when the Clovercroft school was built and everything. But I thought I read somewhere where it said it started in 2011 or 12, but I'm pretty sure the alderman before I became an alderman in 2007 had said that they were not going to just give it back to them. So I don't know why it showed it just didn't start until.
Yeah, I know it existed before I
That's right.
arrived in
Exactly.
late 2008,
Mhm.
2009,
I
that
think
had been a
It
topic
wasn't
of
accounted
discussion.
anywhere.
I don't know.
Oh, maybe that was it. Maybe it
I don't
wasn't
know how
accounted
that-
separately. That's
Flowed
probably
to us,
it.
yeah.
It wasn't accounted for separately.
Yes.
That's a very good point.
in 12.
But it really,
And now in this new budget, FY18 budget, it will be its own fund.
right.
So we're taking that even.
But
step
it may
further.
not have been accounted for separately, because I know some other places do some of their things with the county. They just put them in their general fund.
Mhm.
Right.
And that may have been what we did for a while. Okay. Right. Otherwise, I guess, knock on wood, you know, of course, last year, we were saying that was kind of the high water mark for recent times on the, road impact fees and I guess our regular
Our
facilities tax.
facilities tax, city
Mhm.
facilities, yeah.
Anything else? Okay.
I don't.
I don't either.
Good. Well, and I guess the announcement is there will not be any regular July meeting of this committee.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any other business? Well, I guess I need to hear a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. I had such confidence in this committee that I have interviews scheduled for 3:30 for a
Hey, there
position
you
we're
go.
working on.
Hey,
You
hey,
did.